Hey Optimancers, Chris here. In my last video I discussed 10 spells I like as a player, but not as a DM. In today's video I'm going to go over 10 spells I like as a DM, but not as a player. As I went over in my last video, my goals when casting a spell change depending on whether I'm a player or a DM. When we're playing as a DM, we are actually playing to lose. We want the party to be ultimately successful. But we still want them to feel challenged. When it comes to spells I really enjoy using as a DM, I want spells that create obstacles for the party that require them to alter their tactics or change their experience from just any run-of-the-mill encounter. I want spells that create a mood or communicate something to the players. I want creatures and encounters that feel unique. I also want spells that don't leave players twiddling their thumbs because their character's paralyzed or incapacitated or stunned. Today's video covers 10 spells I love to use as a DM that I'd be unlikely or never select as a player. So for this list, I'm doing something a little bit different than in my last video. What I noticed is there were spells of every level that I thought fit this criteria. So my 10 spells today are going to list a spell from every level of spell, including cantrips. Hi, if you enjoy these videos and you would be interested in supporting this channel, you can do so through Patreon. There is a link in the video description. Patrons of this channel get to see these videos early and without any YouTube ads. Depending on your level of support, there's additional perks as well. Today I want to thank some of my top level patrons: Ramen Goblin, Robbies, Rohit, RVSP66, Ryan Squire, Sajin Abraham, Scott Ballantyne, Scott Dunnington, and Sig. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. Okay, our first spell, let's start with the most infamous spell in the game, the cantrip True Strike. I mean, as a player, True Strike is a terrible, terrible spell. It reads, you point a finger at a target in range, your magic grants you brief insight into the target's defenses. On your next turn, you gain advantage on your first attack roll against the target, provided the spell hasn't ended. This is a cantrip, uses your concentration, lasts around 30-foot range. So mechanically, this spell is terrible. For giving up our action so we can attack with advantage, I mean, why not just attack twice? True Strike gives us 2 attack rolls, but we only hit once. But if we had just attacked twice, rather than casting the spell, we could have potentially hit twice, and we don't have to use our concentration. True Strike simply reduces the amount of damage you could have otherwise done. But you know what? If I'm a DM, I mean, let's face it, we do as much damage as we like. If we want to deliver more damage, we can simply select an opponent for the players that does more damage, or have more opponents. We're setting the difficulty of the challenge. So the fact that True Strike actually reduces damage isn't really an issue. But when it comes to setting mood, True Strike actually delivers. Think about this. So we have the PCs, and they encounter some strange giant with a massive 2-handed flail. On round 1, the giant swings the flail once, hitting a familiar or non-PC for a strike that would have flattened a player character. Attacks against the giant seem to be whittling it down all too slowly. Then on round 2, the giant points at one of the player characters, smiles, and casts True Strike. So what you've just done is created a sense of dread. The players have 1 round to figure out what to do. Maybe they can down the giant, or control its movement, or get the player character who was targeted to a position of safety. One way or another, that moment where the spell is cast creates panic and excitement and gives the combat a unique feel. The player whose character was targeted is going to remember the moment. As a DM, we've done our job with a spell that is often ranked as the worst in the game. Second up, Bane. Now here's a dirty secret. Bane is actually a good spell, for a player or two. But as a player, we can't help but compare it to Bless, which always works. All well, Bane provides a saving throw to avoid the effect entirely. So, although Bane is actually a perfectly decent spell, it is very seldom selected by players and even more rarely cast. Though honestly, personally, I've started experimenting with Bane as a player because I'm starting to think we've been underrating it all this time. I mean, it is worded very similarly to Bless, but the effect actually is tactically quite different. It reads, up to 3 creatures of your choice that you can see within range must make charisma saving throws. Whenever a target that fails the saving throw makes an attack roll or a saving throw before the spell ends, the target must roll a d4 and subtract the number rolled from the attack roll or saving throw, and then you can upcast it. When you cast a spell using a slot of 2nd level or higher, you can target 1 additional creature for each slot above first. It's 30-foot range, duration 1 minute using concentration. So as I mentioned, I do think this is underrated for players, but I seldom see it used. But as a DM, I've always thought Bane is a great way to effectively and actually fairly severely debuff player characters without shutting them down entirely. Charisma saving throws tend not to be a saving throw that players are all that worried about, and when you target 3 player characters with this, it's likely to land on at least one of them. And then, until they can break concentration of the caster, they're taking that d4 penalty on all attack rolls and saving throws. This spell absolutely turns many successful results into failures. If you really want to get a player shaking, follow this up with a Mind Sliver, which now they're even less likely to save against, and now they have a 2d4 penalty on their next saving throw. Now you chuckle, maybe even rub your hands together. It doesn't matter what saving throw spell you're planning to sling at them next, because in their head, all the worst possibilities are now in their mind. Will they have a minus 2d4 against a whole person, a phantasmal killer, a disintegrate? But really, don't make it disintegrate. Okay, so third up, Crown of Madness. It reads, 1 humanoid of your choice that you can see within range must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or become charmed by you for the duration. While the target is charmed in this way, a twisted crown of jagged iron appears on its head and a madness glows in its eyes. The charmed target must use its action before moving on each of its turns to make a melee attack against a creature other than itself that you mentally choose. The target can act normally on its turn if you choose no creature or if none are within its reach. On your subsequent turns, you must use your action to maintain control of the target or the spell ends. Also, the target can make a wisdom saving throw at the end of each of its turns, and on a success, the spell ends. This is concentration and lasts 1 minute. So, Crown of Madness is a bad spell. It's 2nd level, it requires concentration, and it uses your action every turn, and it can just often be worked around. If there's no creature within reach at the start of the targeted creature's turns, you're maintaining your concentration to do nothing. Never mind, it targets 1 creature, and if they make their save, nothing happens, and it gets a saving throw every round. But as a DM, I like this spell a lot. The thing is, I'm normally not a fan of casting spells at player characters that remove player agency. A dominated player character basically takes the one thing a player has control of away from them. But Crown of Madness is a bit different though. It potentially takes agency away from the target, but as a player, we can actually change our tactics to deal with this. Suddenly, ensuring that nobody is within reach of the character at the start of their turns becomes an additional challenge you've added to the encounter. And now, the players need to deal with this challenge. Keeping other player characters away isn't that big a deal, but let's say the character is a spellcaster. Well, then you might even want to keep enemies away so that the player character's action is available for spellcasting. Keeping the other player characters away isn't that big a deal. But say the character is a spellcaster. Well, then you might even want to keep enemies away so that player characters' actions are available for spellcasting. That is kind of a cool and, more importantly, unique challenge. That gives an encounter a unique twist. Now, I once used the Demon Prince Grast for a high-level one-shot, and he has the ability to cast his spell at will and can use legendary actions to cause the charmed creature to move where he directs. Having the players deal with the additional level of challenge this created was a blast, and the players dealt with this challenge, and it created a completely new dynamic of encounter, players coordinating to figure out how to deal with this. I highly recommend it. In our 4th entry, the level 3 spell Gaseous Form. It reads, you transform a willing creature you touch, along with everything it's wearing and carrying, into a misty cloud for the duration. The spell ends if the creature drops to 0 hit points, and an incorporeal creature isn't affected. Well, in this form, the target's only method of movement is a flying speed of 10 feet. The target can enter and occupy the space of another creature. The target has resistance to non-magical damage, and it has advantage on strength, dexterity, and constitution saving throws. The target can pass through small holes, narrow openings, and even mere cracks, though it treats liquids as though they were solid surfaces. The target can't fall and remains hovering in the air even when stunned or otherwise incapacitated. While in the form of a misty cloud, the target can't talk or manipulate objects, and any objects it was carrying or holding can't be dropped, used, or otherwise interacted with. The target can't attack or cast spells. This is a 3rd level spell. Touch is the range. Duration is concentration, 1 hour. So there are 2 main problems with Gaseous Form when you cast it as a player. First, the movement rate is really slow. And second, it doesn't prevent taking damage. So, I guess as occasional utility can be okay, but even that gets heavily limited since it's only used on one creature and there's no upcasting. I can't remember any time I've actually found room on my preparation list to prepare this spell. But here's what's great about casting Gaseous Form as a DM. The minute that big bad casts Gaseous Form, you will have at least one player shout out, "They're trying to escape!" Then there's this mad scramble to prevent that from happening. And since they can seep through cracks, we can set things up so that is not easy to do. Like I said, a spell cast from a DM is often just about creating a mood, and Gaseous Form delivers on that. You don't cast this when the players are still feeling uneasy about a combat. You cast it once they're confident, and the rest of the battle is just about cleaning up. We've lost a lot of the excitement of that combat. Then this spell is cast, and suddenly that excitement level springs right back up. What was going to be a total victory is now in jeopardy, and the players are going to respond to that. Now, this one requires you plan for that moment. If the enemy casts a spell and it has nowhere to go, then it fails to do what you want. Make sure there's that small crack, or something to that effect, that the creature can make use of, and then watch the players scramble in response. There's 2 ways this works well. Either to make the victory of the players all that much more satisfying, or to create an enemy that's going to reoccur. And either can be great. That brings us to our 5th spell, Elemental Bane. It reads, choose one creature you can see within range, and choose one of the following damage types: acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. The target must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or be affected by the spell for its duration. The first time each turn an affected target takes damage of the chosen type, the target takes an extra 2d6 damage of that type. Moreover, the target loses any resistance to that damage type until the spell ends. If we use this spell using a spell slot of 5th level or higher, you can target 1 additional creature for each slot level above 4th. The creatures must be within 30 feet of each other when you target them. This spell has a 90-foot range, lasts for 1 minute, and uses your concentration. So, as a player, this is a terrible spell. This is just way too unreliable, and it's slow to set up, even if it works, and it is a reasonably high-level spell. A 2-round setup to deliver some elemental damage probably isn't even worth this if it didn't provide a saving throw. But with the save, this is terrible. And before even taking that into account, this is concentration. So it's just bad on bad on bad. This might just be the worst 4th level spell, period. That is, as a player. As a DM, I love the mood the spell sets. Players are absolutely desperate to make their saving throws against an Elemental Bane spell. And should they fail that saving throw, you will have absolute desperation to avoid what they know is likely going to follow on the following round. The way I read this spell, it also prevents gaining resistance, so even the old reliable absorb elements isn't going to help them. Make sure to describe that the player characters see the caster now starting to invoke fire on their fingertips, or the dragon starting to inhale. For the next round, everything changes. Panic sets in, and the players have just had the challenge turn on its head. Just an amazing spell to convey mood to your players. This is kind of like the mood from a True Strike, but on cocaine. The sixth entry on our list is Dream. It reads, the spell shapes a creature's dreams. Choose a creature known to you as the target of the spell. The target must be on the same plane of existence as you. Creatures that don't sleep, such as elves, can't be contacted by this spell. You, or a willing creature you touch, enters a trance state, acting as a messenger. While in the trance, the messenger is aware of his or her surroundings, but can't take actions or move. If the target is asleep, the messenger appears in the target's dreams and can converse with the target as long as it remains asleep through the duration of the spell. The messenger can also shape the environment of the dream, creating landscapes, objects, and other images. The messenger can emerge from the trance at any time, ending the effect of the spell early. The target recalls the dream perfectly upon waking. If the target is awake when you cast a spell, the messenger knows it and can either end the trance and the spell, or wait for the target to fall asleep, at which point the messenger appears in the target's dreams. You can make the messenger appear monstrous and terrifying to the target. If you do so, the messenger can deliver a message of no more than 10 words, and then the target must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, echoes of the phantasmal monstrosity spawn a nightmare that lasts the duration of the target's sleep and prevents the target from gaining any benefit from that rest. In addition, when the target wakes up, it takes 3d6 psychic damage. If you have a body part, a lock of hair, clipping from a nail, or similar portion of the target's body, the target makes its saving throw with disadvantage. This is a 1-minute casting, lasts 8 hours, and provides a wisdom saving throw. Now, to be fair, it's not like I've never cast Dream as a player, but mainly I consider it long-range communication that's more expensive than the sending spell. Marginal utility only. I don't hate it, but it is definitely on the weak side. As a DM, Dream is like the best way to introduce a major enemy to the players. Once the player characters become known to an enemy, it can start to visit them in their dreams, frightening them, taunting them, promising their eventual and complete and utter defeat. This would already be a decent storytelling device and narrative tool, but we also suddenly get a new challenge for player characters. You really can't prevent this spell. I mean, assuming your character sleeps and you're not looking to be true polymorphed into an elf or something, you can't counterspell it, and if the saving throw has failed, then you don't get the benefit from the long rest. And you can imagine how devastating that could be. I mean, we're not just talking exhaustion, which is bad on its own, but also not recovering hit dice, hit points, spell slots, or features. Now, the players are going to be scrambling for ways to deal with this new challenge. The obvious and probably most effective is to find a way to make the saving throw more reliably. Allow the players to watch each other sleep and recognize the restless stirrings of a nightmare. Then allow inspiration or a flash of genius or whatever to help the player character succeed. Also, change your targets. Don't pick one player and pick on them. Spread the nightmares around. An additional challenge will be suddenly the players are going to be super focused on finding this caster and taking care of them. And when the player characters finally confront and defeat the enemy, there is a sense of accomplishment and victory that far surpasses just your ordinary big tough bad guy. The nightmare is literally over. We're up to our 7th entry, the 6th level spell, Flesh to Stone. It reads, you attempt to turn one creature that you can see within range into stone. If the target's body is made of flesh, the creature must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, it's restrained, and its flesh begins to harden. On a successful save, the creature isn't affected. A creature restrained by the spell must make another Constitution saving throw at the end of each of its turns. If it successfully saves against the spell 3 times, the spell ends. If it fails its saves 3 times, then it is turned to stone and subjected to the petrified condition for the duration. The successes and failures don't need to be consecutive. Keep track of both until the target collects 3 of a kind. If the creature is physically broken while petrified, it suffers from similar deformities even if it reverts to its original state. If you maintain your concentration on the spell for the entire possible duration, the creature is turned to stone until the effect is removed. This is a 6th level spell, 60-foot range, concentration 1 minute. So in other words, you cast a spell, and even if a creature is petrified, you must concentrate on it for a minute for the effect to be permanent. So here is why I hate this spell as a player. You cast it on an enemy, and if they make their saving throw, then nothing happens. But even if they fail their saving throw, they're just restrained. Which hurts, but I mean, we can restrain multiple enemies with first level spells. This spell is 6th level. The hope, of course, is to petrify an enemy, but that takes an absolute minimum of 3 additional rounds. 3 rounds! I mean, the combat is probably going to be over already. This spell isn't make your saving throw or you're petrified. This spell is make your saving throw or make another saving throw, and then another, and then another. Horrible spell. But if I'm the DM, this spell is fantastic. Petrification is basically death for a player character. So if they fail that first saving throw, everything changes. This player character's very life is now in jeopardy, in a way unlikely they normally see in combat. It doesn't matter how many hit points they have, how high their armor class is. Everything comes down to what happens before this spell duration expires. We're also not taking the character out of the fight. That player can still act on their turns, though they're heavily debuffed by being restrained, but more so, they're desperate. And again, we are creating a mood. And even if they do happen to fail that 4th saving throw in a row to become petrified, as long as that creature that casts this spell is defeated before a minute ends, they'll lose concentration and that player character will recover. And this spell creates teamwork. Other players trying to disrupt concentration, trying to boost saving throws, suddenly everyone is working together, trying to avoid this horrible fate that has become a new challenge for them. Absolutely can create a dramatic fight, where every player has their attention divided between dealing with the enemies and saving a friend. In Spider-Man the Green Goblin says, "This is why only fools are heroes. You never know when some lunatic will come along with a sadistic choice." The lunatic in this case, of course, is me. If you want to be even more evil, tell the other players that if the target of this spell was to die, that creature probably would not bother concentrating on it anymore. Okay, on to our 8th spell, the 7th level spell, Mordenkainen's Sword. It reads, you create a sword-shaped plane of force that hovers within range. It lasts for the duration. When the sword appears, you make a melee spell attack against a target of your choice within 5 feet of the sword. On a hit, the target takes 3d10 force damage. Until the spell ends, you can use a bonus action on each of your turns to move the sword up to 20 feet to a spot you can see and repeat this attack against the same target or a different one. And this is a 7th level spell with a 60-foot range, concentration, and lasts a minute. Okay, so True Strike aside, this is a contender for the worst spell for its level in the game. It uses your concentration, it uses your bonus actions, it uses a 7th level slot, and 3d10 damage. When we're talking this kind of level, that's almost irrelevant. It is almost comical how bad this spell is. It is a joke, and that is exactly how I enjoy using it as a DM. So I ran a one-shot several times where I had this archmage kind of enemy, easily identifiable as an archmage, and was talking a big game. And then the party sees this guy, he gets his turn, he begins to cast a spell, taunting the players, now you will face my true power. So most of the groups then tried to counterspell. And when they counterspelled, they discovered they were counterspelling a 7th level spell. This, of course, made it uncertain because when you're using counterspell, then when you're trying to counter a higher level spell, you have to make an ability check. 7th level spell is not easy to do. So there's this panic amongst the players. Whatever this spell is probably really powerful. They need to counterspell it. So there's this panic, multiple counterspells in some cases, and in some cases this Archmage managed to get the spell off. And then what happens? Mordenkainen's sword appears, and everyone laughs. And if it was counterspelled, I would tell them they counterspelled Mordenkainen's sword. Again, just this huge relief and laughter. And that is the joy of this spell. The mood we're creating, or the mood we want to create as a DM, isn't always fear and dread. Sometimes we want to change the mood around. and that can create a better experience for the players. If it's always panic and dread, that can actually kind of wear on players. So having these comic relief moments is a nice thing to do as a DM. We're up to the 9th spell on our list, the 8th level spell, Control Weather. It reads, take control of the weather within 5 miles of you for the duration. You must be outdoors to cast this spell. Moving to a place where you don't have a clear path to the sky ends this spell early. When you cast this spell, you change the current weather conditions, which are determined by the DM based on climate and season. You can change precipitation, temperature, and wind. It takes a d4 times 10 minutes for the new conditions to take effect. Once they do so, you can change the conditions again. When the spell ends, the weather gradually returns to normal. When you change the weather conditions, find a current condition on the following tables and change its stage by 1, up or down. When changing the wind, you can change its directions. The charts you can see, like for example wind, we have calm, moderate wind, strong wind, gale, and storm. The spell takes 10 minutes to cast and lasts up to 8 hours using your concentration. Okay, so as a player, this spell is kind of cool conceptually, but it just doesn't end up being useful mechanically. It's dead slow. And when do you actually use it? Even in the ever-present, we're dealing with a massive army scenario in whiteboard theorization, it's still not nearly the best option you have with this level of spell. And let's face it, the massive army you need to deal with isn't nearly as common in gameplay as it seems to be when we're talking about the usefulness of high-level spells. But as a DM, a spell with a slow burn that's cool conceptually, but not a huge threat to players, is perfect for creating a mood. We see this in epic fantasy all the time. The big enemy is constantly foreshadowed through weather events. The dark clouds roll in, the rain starts to fall, building a downpour. Could you imagine Helm's Deep if it was blue skies? This is a low-stakes, high-value spell, and that makes it terrible as a player character selection, but that's also what makes it great as a DM selection. It conveys power. This is an enemy capable of high-level spellcasting. It conveys mood, as the skies darken and the ground turns muddy. But we're not killing off the player characters. We're just foreshadowing the power of an enemy that ultimately will be their great adversary. Something they're going to have to build towards. This spell is a great storytelling device. It's just not all that effective. And now we finish off our list with our 10th entry, and a 9th level spell. And that spell is Gate. It reads, you conjure a portal linking an unoccupied space you can see within range to a precise location on a different plane of existence. The portal is a circular opening, which you can make 5 to 20 feet in diameter. You can orient the portal in any direction you choose, and the portal lasts for the duration. The portal has a front and a back on each plane where it appears. Traveling through the portal is possible only by moving through its front. Anything that does so is instantly transported to the other plane, appearing in the unoccupied space nearest the portal. Deities and other planar rulers can prevent portals created by this spell from opening in their presence or anywhere within their domains. When you cast a spell, you can speak the name of a specific creature. A pseudonym, a title, or a nickname doesn't work, and if that creature is on a plane other than the one you're on, the portal opens in the named creature's immediate vicinity and draws the creature through it to the nearest unoccupied space on your side of the portal. You gain no special power over the creature, and it's free to act as the DM deems is appropriate. It might leave, attack you, or help you. As I mentioned, 9th level spell, 60-foot range, concentration 1 minute. So if Gate wasn't a 9th level spell, I might not mind it as a player. But in a game where we've mastered planar travel with lower level spells, and we have one solitary 9th level spell slot, and spells like Wish, True Polymorph, Shape Change, Foresight, Prismatic Wall, Meteor Swarm, and Mass Heal exist, taking Gate just seems like a massive disappointment. Yeah, you can potentially call a creature through it, but unless the DM has set something up specifically for that moment, you don't control them, you need their true name, so I just wouldn't count on it being all that dramatic. Now there are some really specific cases, but in reality, just not enough to justify not taking one of those other constantly game-changing and ultra-powerful spells instead. But as a DM, Gate is dramatic. The idea here is the enemy is either from another plane or maybe they have an alliance or pact with a powerful entity from another plane. The characters face the enemy, and things are looking promising. Then, the gate opens, and creatures start pouring through. Players have to figure out how to close the gate. Can they disrupt concentration? Can they block it somehow? The longer the gate remains open, the harder the challenge becomes. And let's face it, conceptually, otherworldly monsters pouring through a planar gate is just cool. Make sure so many rush out they completely obscure the caster, giving them full cover. Then the players can't just take out the caster, because if they can, the fun isn't going to last. This is one of those cases where a spell just isn't that effective for players, but we can make it effective for an enemy. If you really want to ramp it up, have some of the monsters that came through the gate cast gate as well. Now there's multiple rifts for which enemies are pouring out. Now taking out the original caster isn't enough, and the players need to stop a building tidal wave. Or maybe they just need to escape, depending on how much you ramp it up. It's a dramatic moment. That creates a building panic among the players. And that's it. 10 spells I love as a player, but hate as a DM, and 10 spells I love as a DM, but don't like as a player. What spells do you find a very different experience when casting as a DM or as a player? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.